Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Leslie Wegener. I live in Stoddard, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the La Crosse area. On behalf of League and this evening's co-sponsors, the La Crosse Area Chamber of Commerce and AAUW La Crosse, we want to thank you for turning out for tonight's program, and we especially want to thank our panelists for accepting our invitation to speak. For those of you unfamiliar with the League of Women Voters, we are a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We also work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League takes positions on key public policy issues after study, debate, and consensus by our membership. We have been active in studying and promoting improvement of the elementary and secondary system of public education in Wisconsin since 1927. Our education policy position statement reads as follows: promote educational equity and access to educational opportunities for each child through non-discriminatory policies and an equitable state aids formula while retaining substantial program and personnel responsibilities in the local district. Our local league has not taken a position on the La Crosse school referendum, nor have tonight's co-sponsors. However, we all believe that every voter should be well informed about what's being asked and what's at stake in November. And that's the goal of tonight's program. With that comes the disclaimer that the information and views expressed this evening are those of the panelists and do not necessarily represent the views of the League of Women Voters or our program co-sponsors. So I thought that I would start with just a little bit of background on this. Data comes from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and this is just about referendums, some referendum data. This November, nearly half of all Wisconsin school districts will have gone to referendum in 2024, asking for almost $6 billion in total from Wisconsin residents in districts across the state. At least 192 school districts of the state's 421 will have posed 241 referendum questions to residents of their districts this year. I didn't do a thing. I did not. So these referendum questions generally take two forms: capital and operating referendum. So what is the difference? An operational referendum provides school districts additional voter-approved tax levy authority. At this time, 100 school districts in the state of Wisconsin depend on voter-approved referendum support for at least 10% of their total operational budget. In a capital referendum, funds are borrowed through bonds and paid back with interest. This type of referendum is most often used for building projects, and this is the type of referendum La Crosse voters will be seeing on the ballot for the upcoming general election. So just to put this into context a little bit, I wanted to ask for a show of hands from the audience. How many people have seen these signs appearing around La Crosse? Good, good. That's nice to see. How many of you have seen or read this ballot question in writing? Good. It's a lot, as you can see. And after tonight, our hope is that you gain a greater understanding of what the school district is asking of voters, why this plan is being presented for your consideration at this point in time, and how it affects our community now and in the future. We are very grateful to our panelists for leading this important conversation. So here is quickly how we're going to conduct the format for tonight's program. Our panelists are going to be speaking for approximately 30 minutes. And then around 6:30, 6:45, we'll move to the Q&A segment, which will be moderated by Catherine Kolkmeyer from the Crosse Area League of Women Voters. Our panel will be responding to written questions collected from the audience, as well as prepared questions and those received in advance by email to the La Crosse Area League. And just as a note, we did not receive any questions in advance. We have paper and pens here, and we ask that you write your question as neatly as possible. Raise your hand when your question card is ready, and we'll collect it for the moderator. She has the option of rephrasing for clarity or combining questions that are similar. We'll cover as many questions as possible before our time runs out. At around 7:15 or 7:20, we'll begin to wrap up with a few final statements, additional resources, and reminders about Election Day. Tonight's program is being live streamed on the La Crosse Area League of Women Voters YouTube page, and it's also being recorded. So if you are watching this on a live stream and you happen to lose us for any reason, just know that the recording links will be posted later, and we'll include those addresses at the end on our closing slide. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Erin Engel, Superintendent of the La Crosse School District, who is going to do the honors of introducing our panel of speakers this evening. Dr. Engel is here as our special guest, and we appreciate his willingness to join in the Q&A segment following the panel discussion.
First, I want to say thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for providing this awesome opportunity. I appreciate the League's support of democracy, civic engagement, and public education. And thank you to Ms. Wagner for making this whole happen. And thank you to Ms. Kolkmeyer for moderating tonight. We have some great panelists here this evening, and I'm excited to introduce Ms. Jill Schams, a music teacher in the school district of La Crosse and La Crosse Education Association co-president. She's been in La Crosse, a public education teacher for 20 years and 13 in the school district of La Crosse, and has taught at Roosevelt Elementary School, Cooley Montessori, State Road, and Southern Bluffs, so she knows our school district well. Also excited to welcome Dr. Trevor Sprague, a member of our school board. He's in the second year of his first term, of many, I hope. We have a 9-member school board that is elected to 3-year terms, and Dr. Sprague is a part of that group and currently serves as the treasurer for our school board. Next, we have Miss Andrea Trane. One of the most important roles I believe she has served for the purposes of this panel is a facility advisory committee member. But she is also currently the Director of Planning, Development, and Assessment with the City of La Crosse, and she's been in that role for 4 years and with the city for 8. And the Planning Department does all sorts of wonderful things for our city, including master planning, economic development, community development, housing, a whole host of things that she is expert over. I'll describe the Facility Advisory Committee really quickly so folks have an understanding of that. It's a group of community members that the school district assembled last year, 2023, for 8 months to explore strategies to approach our elementary schools and the issues of declining enrollment and aging buildings. And this group got together for 8 months, debated a variety of different ways to approach the issue, and settled on a series of recommendations that were presented to the school board in November of 2023. The school board took that information along with some public hearings to move forward with the work that ultimately led to this referendum. And so I'm very, very thankful to the work of our Facility Advisory Committee. And at the end of the table, we have Mr. Steve O'Malley, another Facility Advisory Committee member, and a retired county administrator for the city of La Crosse for 19 years, and he has served 37 years in local government, a real civic leader and a testament to public service in our community. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Kolkmeyer and the panel.
And the school district for asking us to be involved. I'm hopeful that our citizens will be engaged in understanding the motivation for both the referendum and the history. I appreciate the introduction that the superintendent gave regarding the Facilities Advisory Committee. There are 20 of us on that. We represented quite a cross-section of people in our community, from recently retired to young parents to expected parents. So a lot of engagement around the needs of the school district. I had the honor of working with 3 different superintendents during my 19 years, Jerry Kember, Randy Nelson, and of course Aaron. We did a lot of collaboration together behind the scenes that most people aren't aware of, and one of the most serious issues we've been trying to tackle for the entire 21 years that I've lived in this town has been the enrollment decline. It's a huge challenge, and I learned even more during the 8 months of the challenge of our school board and our administration and staff that are struggling with what to do about that decline. And so we have the luxury of only making recommendations. We didn't have to make any decision. I went back and forth on our final recommendations several times as we voted. I think we had pretty much unanimous agreement about recommending 2 schools to be closed, but which schools was really where the rub was. We never really got to full unanimous support. So we provided that to the school board. We presented that, and well, I'm not going to say how I'm going to vote or not. I am impressed by the creativity of the solution that reminds me several years ago when our community built the North Side School and closed 2 other older facilities. I think living on the North Side as I do, I think people felt that was a way of emphasizing neighborhood pride, emphasizing a high quality building. And so anyway, I'm excited about the process. I just hope our community will get engaged, because I don't think a large number of people understand the challenges of enrollment decline and what the aging buildings really presents as a challenge. I'll shut up and let Andrea talk.
Thank you. And Steve and I didn't compare notes, so I'll just add a couple of things that when he was speaking that I want to also point out about the Facilities Advisory Committee. So as he mentioned, there were 20 people served on that. We met over 8 months. We met one night a month for about 2.5 hours, but we talked about this issue constantly. I was asked to be a part of this for my role as the city planner, and I thought it was very important also, though, to include the rest of my staff, since we are constantly working on some of the issues that got us to this point. So trying to look at what can we do about housing? What can we do to attract young families to this community, and understanding this is a much bigger issue than just picking a building that we're going to shut the doors and move some kids around. Understanding this is a really long-term community issue and wanting our plans with the school district to align. And I think it is with my role. So I did a good, I think I worked a lot with my department on getting their input all the time. I don't think that there was one night that I left that meeting at 8:30 and didn't get several text message committee members wanting to work through some of the things that were discussed. I don't know that towards the end there were any meetings where you didn't see tears from people, understanding that this was such a difficult decision. When we were asked to be on this committee, we weren't really 100% sure on what a facilities advisory committee was expected to do. And I think we pretty quickly realized, after hearing the data of the budgets and the maintenance issues at these buildings, that we needed to look at closing 2 schools. And as Steve said, it was a pretty unanimous decision. I think there was one person who to the end was like, I'm still not voting for any school to close. Like, I want something else to happen that we can make this problem go away. I don't want to speak for him, but just I think that's all how we felt, that we didn't want to get this to this decision. And I think it was also a good mix of people on that committee that, as Steve mentioned, some were older, not necessarily from La Crosse. I was born and raised in the city of La Crosse. I went to Spence and Longfellow and Central. So these are all buildings that I have a huge emotional attachment to. So if someone says, we're going to close the doors on one of these, it feels like they're closing the doors on those memories. And I think a lot of people felt that way. There were a couple of people who taught in these schools, who their kids currently were attending these schools, and we didn't want those memories to go away. And I think in the reality, when we look at the bigger picture, our goal was to create new, better, healthier memories for the upcoming generations. My daughter's just getting ready to enter the school district of La Crosse. We picked our neighborhood because we wanted her to go to Emerson. And so looking at what our recommendation was and knowing that it's not what we recommended, but understanding and having the respect, because I have so much respect for the people that sat on the Facilities Advisory Committee and knowing how hard these decisions were to come to, and having ultimately so much respect for the school board members, knowing that they were having those exact same conversations. So it's interesting that our recommendation, isn't necessarily what's being brought forward in this current referendum, but knowing that there are so much thought and brainstorming and literally sweat and tears that are going into these decisions, and the understanding of how important they are for our community.
And if I might just add one more thing on the enrollment decline, I've had people talk to me in the public about, well, why don't we just do more to get more families? Why don't we do more to change the demographics? Just one statistic. La Crosse County probably grows at no more than 1% a year of total population each and every year. And that's not people of all ages, it's old people, young people, families, and we're competing with smaller school districts that have newer facilities, and it's difficult to keep up, even though we're the largest school district in La Crosse County. There's just like the demographics of our university system, we're not getting a lot of young people, and if you look at some of the data that's in the facilities report, you'll actually see the decline over the past 20 years in total enrollment. But the challenge that's going to be for middle school, for high school, and these elementaries, this is going to be an ongoing issue that your staff and your school board are just going to be challenged every year. This is a first good step that they presented, and I hope the public will consider it.
Try not to drop that. Sorry. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Leslie, and the League of Women Voters, the La Crosse Area Chamber of Commerce, and the AAUW La Crosse for hosting this. It's a great opportunity to engage with this really important question. Thank you to our Facility Advisory Committee members and our representatives of our teachers to be here as well, to share the stage with me here. I really, really appreciate this opportunity to be able to answer questions and to talk back to the community, as we've been receiving so many good questions over the past months. So as Dr. Engel mentioned, my name is Trevor Sprague. I'm one of your board members. I was, as well as a parent of 3 district children. My oldest is in 2nd grade at State Road, and my middle one in kindergarten right behind her, and another one coming sometime eventually. And I also grew up in La Crosse, and I attended Hinchin and Longfellow and graduated from Central High School in 2003. So just like Andrea is saying, these are personal decisions for me as well, and that wrestling process, I really appreciate the framing that you gave that, and that's super important to just why it's important to have these discussions and these opportunities to engage with the community on it. I have about 10 minutes, right? So I wanted to use my time. I did script it out a little bit more. I was taking lots of notes today. So I want to try to contextualize a little bit the work of the board over the past year, and all of these issues, as Steve has brought up, as Leslie mentioned in her introduction, and how this all has shaped what the board's deliberations have been about and what we've been trying to do, and to try to, I hope, reassure people that this process has been methodical, it's been thoughtful, and it has, I think, been empathetic as well, as we certainly have tried to be. So I joined the board in April of 2023, which was just after the previous capital referendum question on the high school consolidation, and then the decision to close Lincoln Middle was the meeting right before I joined the board there. Since that time, much of our work on the new board has been focused on answering this big question. It's what are we going to do to balance our budget and ensure that we maintain our ability to provide high quality programming in all of our schools across our district. The need to make some changes, I think, is really clear. As Steve has sort of mentioned, this isn't a new problem, but it is a problem that is evolving over time. And it's also been a real starting point for most of the board members, taking it as this is something we are going to have to reckon with in our time as board members. And over the past 2 election cycles, really, that has been true. Where we're at now is a continuation of that same process that led to the previous referendum question, the same kinds of discussions that 2 differently composed school boards have all been tackling with, and here we are now. So it's not only the 8 months of the Facilities Advisory Committee, but the overall work of the board is slow, and it's good that these kinds of things are slow and methodical in that sort of way. So the difficulty that we face as a district is because of these demographic changes, we haven't been able to effectively resize, to reshape ourselves in terms of our staffing, and our teaching cohorts, and our facilities footprint to match that reality, the reality of our enrollment. And that digs into the way that school funding is calculated and provided. And I know we'll have some questions about that, so we'll save details on that. So we've, the problem is we have to maintain the level of programming. We have the same number of buildings to teach at and to keep open, but fewer students to fill the classrooms, and students in classrooms ultimately is what equals revenue dollars for the district coming from the state or from the local tax levy. And this is true not just in La Crosse, as Steve mentioned, but across the state. Our state funding level has not kept up with inflation, and indeed has not met the 2/3 commitment that the state legislature has set for itself for school funding. Now, that may be true at the state level, but for La Crosse specifically, right now it's at about 53.5% of our current year's budget is covered by different forms of state aid. The rest is up to us as a community through our local tax levy to support our programming. So we're still left with that challenge then. And it's true that the most recent biennial budget gave us a $325 increase for each of those 2 years, and that did help increase the state share slightly. But it's also true that in 6 or 7 of the last 10 years, we saw 0 increase in our per pupil aid. So that creates a deficit that we're trying to manage. And that's kind of the nature of the issue that we have. And I think this is all important when we're making these difficult decisions as a board to change the shape of our district, to change the shape of what public education looks like in La Crosse, because to make good decisions requires not shying away from that complexity and being able to take a close and careful look at not only those easily quantifiable factors, how much does it cost to heat this building every winter, but those things that are harder to put a dollar amount on, like how far do people have to walk to school? How busy is the street that they have to cross? These are all valid concerns that have been part of our deliberation process here. And it's interesting to me because we're not in this situation because of any one identifiable issue that's easy to solve as well. We're not in this issue because of financial mismanagement, right? Our audits have been stellar year after year. Our budget categories have remained consistently near each other year after year. There's no ballooning areas of costs or extravagant one-time expenses that were unfunded or things like that. We haven't had an explosion of expenses in untried programs or one-off expenses. We don't have any schools that are just outright failing by any objective measure, right? Our students, our families, our teachers love their schools and have been making incredible things happen in all of them, which again goes to just how difficult making any kind of decision to consolidate or close any school buildings really is. So and it's also true with the demographic changes that we on net have now lost some of our student enrollment to our neighboring districts. Not in the numbers that account for all of our demographic shifts, however, and we're also still bringing in a significant number of students, and that level of both in and out has been increasing over the past 5 to 10 years, I think is fair to say. And many of those decisions are for personal family reasons, right? Somebody takes a job in the city and moves from West Salem, but wants their kid, who their 8th grader, to continue into high school in West Salem with the friends they've had their whole lives. And that's perfectly reasonable for people to make those individual decisions. So all of that forms part of the discussion around this issue. And it makes the question that the board has been wrestling with more complex. It's not just how do we save money? The question is really more like, how do we make sure our district maintains the flexibility it needs to budget appropriately for the programming that our students deserve and our community expects, and ensure that La Crosse remains an attractive and competitive place for teachers and new graduates to consider starting their career or moving their family, and be mindful of the way the tax burden impacts different parts of our communities differently. Not everyone bears it in quite the same way. And create the conditions for long-term financial programmatic stability based on prudent decision-making. And that's a lot of multiple questions bound into one. And that's what I mean by not shying away from the complexity of that, because we can think through those and be mindful of all of those things. So we collected a ton of data from the FAC and from community listening sessions, from fierce advocates for all of our schools. And I do think it's worth noting and taking a second to acknowledge that it has never been the board or the administration's intent to ask any of our schools to justify themselves, to make the case for their continued existence, because we know they are all succeeding in a number of ways. And that unfortunately doesn't make the decision any easier, but that hasn't been part of the intention of any of this, certainly. And then the goal of convening a facility advisories committee was to be able to look really closely and at a variety of specific parameters, and to be able to weigh the trade-offs of, if we take course A, what do we gain? What do we lose? If we take course B, what do we gain? What do we lose? So that recommendation that they provided was absolutely critical to the work of the board. And clarifying the relationship, I think, between the board and the FAC is also a little bit important, because the recommendation kind of came in multiple parts. And the first part of it was to consider a long-range facility plan to replace or rejuvenate our aging facility stock kind of across the district. And the plan that we put forward as a board, I think, does that. It addresses 4 of our oldest buildings at the same time. So it goes that step further than the Facility Advisories Committee was really able to do. They suggested that we use referenda where possible in considering updates or in considering new construction. Now, that's one area where the board has to do that, to use that authority to do new construction. We have to go to referendum for that. And this proposal obviously does that. We were asking this question in November. And finally, they determined over these 8 months, as Steve was saying very nicely, I think, that the closure of 2 elementary buildings gave us the most benefit in terms of what it does for our students, what it does for the educational environment, and what the impact on our families in the district are. And then the various combinations of 2 schools really was where that difficult work was. And so the referendum that we've proposed as a board achieves that closure of 2 buildings, but goes that extra step to address more of our aging properties through consolidation of closure of Hinchin and consolidation into the State Road building with an addition, as well as the Hogan Administrative Building, which has been overbuilt for our needs in administration and been kind of in people's minds for a long time. So, and I think that the FAC, to their great credit, really recognized that this step of addressing 2 elementary buildings specifically is really just a first step in an ongoing strategic approach to our facilities. So I know I'm way over my 10 minutes at this point, but I'm gonna, sorry. So the work done by the FAC was absolutely crucial to our ability to make informed decisions. Looking at the savings, both in terms of faculty and operational costs and deferred maintenance for each property, and putting those into different combinations was all really important. And from my perspective as an individual board member, coming to the decision on which schools to close and consolidate came down to as much the savings that would be accrued by that as the opportunity we have to make a longer term investment to create stability and flexibility that'll allow us to adjust as the demographics continue to change, and to allow us to minimize some much more devastating and drastic kinds of reductions. There are other mechanisms we have to find savings. The school board can close schools outright without going to a referendum, and I think we fairly unanimously agreed that that was not a desirable outcome because of the way it would it would move people suddenly and without a lot of ability to control how students and teachers are moving together, which is something that this plan allows us to do by preparing a new site to send students and teachers to who have been together for the first years of their elementary education, and to have that wonderful experience of finishing with their friends, with their teachers in a new facility as well. I'm going to skip ahead. So in the end, I guess, because we'll get to more in the Q&A for sure, I support the idea of the referendum. Obviously, I voted for it. I think it's worth noting that along the way in our deliberations, most of our votes about what not to do and which courses to pursue were unanimous or nearly so. And this is across 2 differently constituted boards now. And all of the board members in the current iteration have also expressed their support for seeing this plan through, and for what the referendum tries to accomplish for us. It is an investment, absolutely, to make changes that I think in the end will strengthen our schools. It will support our teachers and our staff and allow our students and families to move into a good new situation that is positive and that is hopeful, rather than anxiety inducing as well. And to do so in an organized and methodical way, rather than closing a building suddenly and finding space where we can. That's why I really truly believe that this referendum is, if successful, it will achieve those things to help make sure that public education in La Crosse continues to provide for our students, to stand out among our neighboring communities, and to make La Crosse more attractive, and to ensure that La Crosse continues to appear as a space that young families want to be here. Right, as I always knew it to be when I grew up and chose to bring my family back here to raise my children after graduate school. So I really look forward to more questions. I'm going to let Jill get on with it and be quiet for a little while.
Thanks, Trevor. All right, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for inviting me to speak with you tonight. I am Jill Schams. I am the co-president of the La Crosse Education Association, which is the local teachers union here in La Crosse. I've been teaching elementary music for 20 years, and I also have 2 kids that currently attend school in La Crosse. So you've heard kind of how we've gotten to this point, the rationale for why we've had to go to referendum, and how the decision was made to get to the current referendum that we're at. So I'd like to speak to you in the what happens now phase of things. So we know that the nuts and bolts of this referendum really are focused on the declining enrollment, the lower revenue that we're taking in per student, and then our aging buildings. But the plan really keeps the focus on what is doing best for kids and staff. And as the LEA, La Crosse Education Association, that's our motto, is doing what's best for kids. And so I think that this referendum plan keeps that at the forefront for not only addressing those issues that we are facing, but keeping kids at the forefront. So if the referendum is approved by voters, these are the results that would come from an approved referendum. Our city and our neighborhoods would benefit from new and updated facilities. This keeps La Crosse competitive with our neighboring districts. We have a lot of aging buildings, and if you drive through other neighboring communities, they have a lot of new buildings. As a parent, if I was looking to relocate and I drove through some neighborhoods, I'd probably go to the ones that have new facilities. And we want that for our city. We want that for our kids. We want new and updated places for them to attend school. We want classrooms that are designed specifically for modern and accessible teaching and learning. I've taught in many schools in the city over my many years here, and there are some schools that are past their best by, use by date, right? And we can keep putting Band-Aids and patching those buildings up, but we're not really giving our students the full advantage that we can give them by offering them a facility that's built with technology in mind, not as an afterthought, that it's built specifically for spaces that are useful for the way that we teach kids these days and the way that students learn. And our buildings have served us for many, many years, but education has changed. And so we need to stay up to date in our facilities with the way that education has developed over time. If the elementary upgrade is approved, it will keep our students together with their classmates and their teachers. I have a second grader. She tunes in. She doesn't seem like she's listening, but she does. And so, of course, we talk about this at home. My husband's also a teacher in the district. And she attends Spence, one of the schools that is slated to close and consolidate to the Hogan site. And so, of course, she said, "Mom, do I have to go to a new school?" She's worried, right? And I said, well, maybe, but wouldn't it be great to go to a new school, and highlighting the benefits of this for her. And all she said was, well, I want to go where my music teacher's going. I want to go where my friends are going. She doesn't care what the name of the school is. She doesn't care where it's located. She wants to be with her friends and her teachers that she loves and she has relationships with. And we all know that, what we teach is very important, but the relationships that we make with students every day is just as important. So this keeps our students together with their peers, their friends, and it keeps our teachers together with those students that they've already developed relationships with. It allows time for a smooth transition to a new facility. This process will not happen overnight. This is a 2-year process of developing plans, consulting with architects and with teachers, asking the community what they want the building to look like and how it will fit into these community spaces. So it gives time for that. It doesn't have to just be a decision and it's done. And it paves the way for the future for education of our children in this community. It sets a course for our community can have great schools and continue to have great schools for the future, so that my second grader can continue her education in a great space. And then maybe someday my grandkids could continue education in a great space, and that we're setting a course for the path forward. If the referendum is rejected by voters, it's a very different situation. The school board would have to likely make very difficult decisions in a very short time frame. These tough and unpopular choices would be probably just closing schools outright, and not in 2 years, like next year, or cutting teaching positions. So that would greatly impact our students where they go to school next year. That's a huge stressor. My own daughter, she doesn't think about it like I do, but it would definitely weigh on her if that was the outcome. Cutting teaching positions would be 40 to 45 teaching staff. This would ultimately increase class sizes. Everybody wants their child to attend a class of small student to teacher ratios. But having to cut that many staff really would increase our class sizes, and then ultimately it would decrease the amount of services that we're able to offer to all of our students and have less programming. And then closing the buildings without consolidating would scatter our students to any remaining buildings that can accommodate them. And so they may not be able to attend with their friends that they've had kindergarten, first, second, even up to going into 5th grade. And they may not be able to attend school with the teachers that they've developed relationships with. I teach K-5 music. My school's not affected by this, but I have talked with other music teachers that see the same students, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And it's heartbreaking for me to think that they would lose that rich relationship that they've built for so many years if we have to scatter our students and our staff. So as teachers, the outlook of declining enrollment and how to handle it has been weighing on us for a long time. We have seen the writing on the wall. We know the challenges. and the unknowns about which schools may be closing through the Facility Advisory Committee's time. That's been a stressful situation for our teachers. Nobody wants their school to close. Not knowing, will my school be the one that closes? Will I have a job next year? Will my colleagues have a job next year? Will my own child have the same school to go to next year? And these stressors really have made an already tough job even harder, because that's weighing on the back of our mind when really we just want to be there for our students and give them a happy, safe educational space. So we recognize that these really are not easy decisions, and that no solution is going to be perfect. However, teachers are overall supportive of this plan. Survey results from the spring indicated that of our teaching staff, almost 80%, 75 to 80%, are supportive of the current referendum as it is written, compared to keeping things status quo and then ultimately resulting in pretty drastic decisions that would have to be made. So I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Well, I think what we're going to do now is go to question and answers. So just so that you know, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Somebody will come to you with a card and a pen. You can write it down. We'll bring it up to Catherine. She's going to moderate the Q&A for us. Thank you, panelists, very much. Get ready for it, because here it comes. Here comes your Q&A.
As I'd also like to thank the panelists for making it difficult to ask questions, because you answered so many of them. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to expand on a couple of these. But the first thing that we wanted to do, since Leslie made a slide that has the language of the question itself that appears on the ballots, we wondered if, and I just want to preface too, these questions are for the whole panel. So if you'd like to pass the microphone back and forth, you're welcome to take that apart. And Dr. Engel, if you'd like to jump in on any of the answers, you're welcome to do that as well. But since we do have the language here that appears on the ballot, would any of you like to parse out that language and describe what will happen to facilities as a result?
That sounds like my job. So the ask of the referendum is for $53.5 million to accomplish two things. One, the smaller project is an addition onto State Road Elementary, which will consist of a new gymnasium and 8 new classrooms, for which some preliminary designs had already kind of been in the works. So we were able to kind of have a fairly solid estimate of what the cost of that would be to add into this. The $41 to $43 million of the overall ask is for the main part of the project, which is the rebuilding of a new elementary school on the Hogan administrative site, and consolidating Spence Elementary and Emerson Elementary into that new building at the time of completion. That's the gist of it. So an addition onto State Road, consolidation of Spence and Emerson into a new building at Hogan Administrative Site. That's what we're hoping to see happen. And I should note the addition at State Road, in addition to accommodating the new students and new teachers, they have one multi-purpose gym cafeteria room right now, which is why the gymnasium is having a dedicated physical education space for that school is a need that this is addressing as well.
Since we're on that topic, we've had several questions from the audience about some of the specifics of where people would be moving. So I'll touch on some of those. One of them says, this is from the audience here tonight, would the new school be open before State Road is completed, or would State Road be completed before the new school?
My understanding is that students from Hinchin would not move to State Road until the addition was completed. And do we have a timeline on that project? Both would open in 27. So Hinchin would close in 27. Those students for the 27-28 school year would begin attending at the newly renovated State Road Elementary.
Okay. And related to that, and this plays a little bit on one of the questions that we just had, will the Hinchin students and teachers also move together to State Road, or will they be divided up between the new school and State Road?
The intention there would be most of them moving to State Road.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, we also wrestle with intra-district transfer and open enrollment. So some students from within the new boundaries may opt to apply to move to one of the different schools. That's part of the considerations, but the overall enrollment of all of the new consolidated options would put all of our schools at closer to 80% capacity, where they're underutilized right now, and kind of in what is the ideal size for an elementary school. Best practices is somewhere between 450 and 500 students. So.
Thank you. Another audience question from tonight. In deciding which schools to close, was the creation of a diverse student body a big factor?
That was definitely something that was considered. So we looked at several factors. Diversity, socioeconomic factors were definitely something that we were considering. So there was a lot of data that was thrown at, and that was one of the top issues. One of the other issues that we looked at a lot was walkability. So how many of the students had the ability or were walking to school versus being bused to school? So, and from my perspective, just to share, that was probably one of the top issues for me, is knowing that strong neighborhoods make strong schools and strong schools make strong neighborhoods. So wanting to see more of that ability for people to walk if they were to so choose.
I would add something to that too, that one of the benefits we believe we gain from this is that with the new consolidated options, 57% of students in the boundaries would live closer to their new school than they currently do. Personally, I think one of the nice things about it, it really regularizes the main boundaries around the elementary schools. We get rid of some of the weird busing islands that are currently being bused from close to Hamilton over to Hinchin. Those students who, some of them can literally see Hamilton from their porches, will now be within the boundary for Hamilton Elementary. So.
Great. Okay, I'm going to turn to one of the questions that was provided by the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm going to combine that with an audience question. So the question is, can you explain, and you talked about this a little bit, so this is an opportunity to expand a little bit on it. Can you explain how the state funding process works for education? And more specifically, you mentioned that the state has not met their expectations, and it was now 53%. Could you tell us why not?
I'll address that one first because I want to be fair to the state that I believe that the commitment to 2/3 funding applies statewide. And so obviously we are a mix of more rural and urban school districts. And so for many of those smaller districts across the state, it may very well be the case, places that are low in enrollment, but with like high tax base, right? That their aid formula works out to 2/3 funding. But for La Crosse specifically, and for other communities of comparable size, I imagine, that 2/3 funding has not been met. So it's a statewide commitment. I want to be fair on that, but it does impact us locally pretty heavily. And then as far as how state funding works, the pie that we have, the revenue limit model, and some people may remember in, I believe, 93 is when the revenue limit model went into effect. And it was a strategy to essentially help balance out and equalize aid across school districts, whereas previously, rich districts kept getting richer, poor districts kept getting poorer, and the schools in those districts are suffering. So it was an equity strategy across the state to have this model where, based on enrollment numbers and per pupil funding from the state, that creates how much revenue limit, how much a school district is able to raise for their operational funds. It is so it is essentially a mix of a variety of state aids. There are some grants in there as well, categorical aids, which is a fixed amount we get per pupil each year, and then the equalization aid, which is what that biennial, the 325 in the biennium impacted, increases our revenue limit. And so in addition to providing more money, it increases the total amount of money that we're allowed to levy. And when we had 0 increases over a number of years, the pie stayed the same, right? This is Patty Sprague, our wonderful finance person at the district here. the size of the pie stayed the same while our expenses continued to do what expenses do and go up, keeping with inflation and other factors as well. I hope that answered it.
Thank you. Since we're on the topic of budgets, this is a question from the League of Women Voters. Could you discuss the impact of federal pandemic relief aid in the La Crosse School District? How much was received? How was it spent? And how does it relate to the November referendum?
I'm going to hand that over to Dr. Engel. He knows the ESSER funds way better.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think we received somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 million of ESSER funding over 4 different distributions. We were very thoughtful about how we used that money. We knew it was one-time funds. We'd get it once, and then it would be going away, and we would not get it again. And so we were hesitant to invest it in ongoing expenses like health insurance or teacher wages. You know, even though those were really important things to us that we value, we didn't want to create a budget crisis when this funding went away and we had to find a new way to fund it. And so we convened teachers and administrators and thought really about what would be the greatest impact we could have with this funding in this short window that we have to use it, 2 to 3 years. And some of the things that we identified were early childhood aids and impacts to help get students learning earlier. Reading instruction and reading materials was really important to us. And one of the temporary things that we pursued as well was teaching positions to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. And we saw students coming back with increased academic needs because they hadn't been engaged in formal schooling in the same way, and increased behavioral needs because they didn't have kind of access to pro-social supports at our schools for a period of time. And so we hired folks in our schools to do academic and emotional and social interventions during that period of time. And we've been able to continue some of things through other funding streams, but as we've kind of weaned ourselves off of ESSER funding, we've been able to keep our district afloat and in a good place. You'll probably see some news articles about other school districts that didn't plan quite so wisely, and they're really struggling right now on how to manage their finances as they move forward.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the chamber. With diminishing resources, is there any opportunity to collaborate with community organizations to share resources? Are there any examples of that locally?
What was the first part again?
With diminishing resources, is there any opportunity to collaborate with community organizations to share resources?
We have so many community collaborations, I couldn't begin to quantify them all. I can just articulate some really amazing opportunities we have. We have a partnership with Western Technical College to provide space for our engineering academy. So a great opportunity to provide a concentration of courses for students interested in engineering. It's not a facility that we could provide ourselves with our funding, and so we rely on Western Technical College to help out with that, and we send instructors over there. As a result of that collaboration, our students get college credit, they get an interest that is met through that space, and they get to think of themselves as college students to a certain extent. Really expands their capacity for post-secondary or the trades, if that's what they're interested in. In the same building, we also have a culinary academy, and so we know that the hospitality industry is big in our area, and so we're helping facilitate students getting credentials in the hospitality industry to learn about the culinary arts, and so that's another neat opportunity. We have a great partnership with the Boys and Girls Club for after-school programming. A lot of 50% of our students come from poverty, are on free or reduced lunch. And so there's a real need to support our students beyond the school day. And so we're thankful for a very tight partnership with the Boys and Girls Club, and have had specific sites at Hamilton and Northside for years to create that wraparound services to support our parents in the community. We have a great relationship with our local police department to provide specially trained school resource officers in our schools who know the specific ins and outs of kind of school law, as well as how to work with children in developmentally appropriate ways. And it's allowed them to really focus on legal and safety issues in our schools that they're trained to do that we're not. So that's been a really valuable partnership. grow lacrosse. They do school gardens at our elementary level, and they through their generosity and hard work, they bring in experts in school gardens, environmentalism, and they work in the school gardens at our schools to kind of augment and advance our environmental and school nutrition curriculum. Those are just some. I could go on and on and on, but we have so many amazing opportunities, and our community has been so generous. When we have a need or a gap, they have stepped up to help out.
Steve would like to answer.
Yeah, we've worked with the county on a variety of programs, including shared social work positions, because our caseloads overlap almost entirely. So we have students that have need social services in the schools and in the community, and so we can partner on that. We have a diversion program, system of care. We hire workers in partnership with the county for students that get into a little bit of trouble. And maybe historically they would have had a ticket or even faced jail time. Now we're able to provide a different type of support that's non-punitive in that way, but still holds them accountable for their actions. And so they don't think of themselves as criminals, they think of themselves as a student who's in need of rehabilitation. So that's great partnerships with the county as well.
Thank you. Another question from the chamber. In Iowa, there is a penny tax to help fund school facility projects. Is that something that's viable in Wisconsin?
Would just take the state legislature to institute it. It is incredible in Iowa. They get a penny tax, and it's money that's allocated to school districts on a per pupil basis. They still need a local referendum to spend those dollars if it exceeds a certain threshold. And so it still involves community input into how those funds are used at a local basis, but it lowers the barrier for communities across the state to be able to invest in their schools in the ways that they want to. And if you go to Iowa and you drive through their towns, their buildings are phenomenal. And I think it has probably contributed to the economic boom in the Quad Cities and other places because it is clearly an attractive place to be for a young family. If there's any political movement on that, I would support it entirely.
Great, thank you. We had a couple of questions related to the site at Hogan. One is, if the referendum passes, where will the staff that's currently at Hogan go? And related to that is there enough room on the site where Hogan stands? How many kids in classrooms will there be? Will they all be on one floor?
Yeah, as Dr. Sprague mentioned, Hogan is a bit overbuilt. It's an old elementary school. We take classrooms and converted them into office spaces since the early 80s or late 70s. It's been this way for a very long time, 50 years at this point. And so our plan would be to move the Hogan administrative staff over to Central High School. And 2 years ago, we remodeled the high school offices and moved it from the second floor off of Losey Boulevard, which is inaccessible ADA-wise, and moved it downstairs to the first floor off the cafeteria where families and students come and go every day. And so it's a much more logical place for the high school office to be, and it's been a huge improvement. What it has resulted in is the vacating that space that was upstairs. And so there's some office space that certainly used. Teachers always flow into any nook and cranny, but there is some space that is underutilized there that we'd be able to move our Hogan administrative staff into. There are staff in our building that could probably just be stationed in schools as well, whether that's nurses or IT folks or others that support buildings specifically. And so we anticipate with some light renovations at Central, we'd be able to move into that space. And then in terms of the site at Hogan for an elementary school, while it may not look it, the site is actually a full acre bigger than the North Side elementary site. And so we imagine a similarly constructed building. Architecturally, it would kind of meet whatever the community's interest is in that neighborhood. But similar footprint for a building that would seat about 550 students, but with an acre more space. And so we'd have a lot more flexibility to do some things there with drop-offs, pickups, parking. On the north side, we used a turf field for the playground, which, given the high traffic that's necessary to create kind of a safe, consistent space for kids that isn't muddy and they're not walking in every recess, with grime on them. At the Hogan site, it could potentially be grass because we'd have enough space to spread kids out. It wouldn't get that high use in one spot. And so there's opportunities for a grass playground. There could be a natural playscape like we have up at Summit Elementary School. Lots of different ways we could approach that. And we're really excited to engage the community, our families, and our staff in what that ultimately looks like and how it's oriented on that. But likely 2 stories for an elementary.
I think it's worth pointing out that this is one of those areas where being a public entity, things move a little slower than a private organization could on designing a building, where the goal would be to go through a really robust community-led process of figuring out what do we want this school to look like. We have this great proof of concept of this consolidation of 2 schools in the North Side Elementary, and also lessons to be learned. So like, don't make flat-topped lockers that the kids can climb on top of is one I heard recently. So there's good opportunities for that. But my point was simply that we haven't been able to go too far into the planning process because we can't spend that money unless the referendum passes. That we, to do architecture and design.
Steve is- Sorry, I thought you were reaching for the microphone. Regarding your needs to balance the budget, have there been conversations around renewable energy installed at the new Hogan building if the referendum is passed?
Yes, absolutely. That would be a goal to build with modern standards. And I don't know if we have it within us to go for LEED certification. I don't know as much about that. But we already have projects in place for putting solar on the school buildings. I know geothermal heat pumps would be a big part of that project. And maybe, Aaron, you could share some more.
Yeah, when we built Northside Elementary, we put in geothermal to run our HVAC, and then recently, because it had a modern, newer roof, we were also able to put on solar panels, and so that helps lower electricity costs. We have another amazing community partnership with Solar on the Crosse Schools, SOLS. They have fundraised hundreds of thousands of dollars to help us put solar panels on our schools. We would continue that effort. LEED certification is certainly something to consider. We can often meet those standards without paying for the certificate. And so there's lots of ways for us to really ensure that it's as energy efficient as possible and is in alignment with the city's global climate change plan.
I think also a good opportunity to highlight another community partnership that's been happening in the Renew the Block program around Lincoln Middle, and rainwater mitigation is a part of that, really working to strengthen and solidify communities. Would you want to say more about that? Oh, okay. It's a great project. Check it out. It's beautifying everything.
Related to this, is another question from the audience. It says 2 issues that I did not hear discussed tonight are climate change and childhood obesity, specifically this as it applies to Northwoods and Southern Bluffs, which are on the edge of the city. I assume that's meaning the climate change effects. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
Okay.
In the sense in that having a large building on a plot of land generates a carbon footprint, obviously, and operating schools.
I'm wondering if it's because of the location being maybe in a floodplain area? Okay, I'm sorry, this is like audience questions. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, and I think with the facility advisory committee's work, one of the things that they talked about, and Andrea mentioned it, was walkability, right? And Northwoods Elementary School is out on County B, kind of in the north of our school district, and there's only 53 students that live within a mile of that building, and so most students are bused there naturally. In 1991, when that building was being considered for construction, the enrollment in our school district was at its height. You know, we were almost 10,000 students, I think, at that point. So a very large school district and in need of new facilities. And when you're in any community in Wisconsin, probably across the nation, and you're looking for a site to build something new that needs to be on hopefully 8 to 15 acres, it's not going to be in your city. It's not going to be right next to a neighborhood, most likely, unless you've got lots of suburban space and there's kind of, suburbs popping up. And so all new schools, pretty much uniformly across the state, are built in cornfields or on the outskirts of town. It's just the only place you can find land. And so that's why when Southern Bluffs and Northwoods were built, they were on the outskirts of town. They had hoped that some new construction for families would happen at Southern Bluffs, but they knew, even in 1991, that not a lot of homes would be built out by Northwoods, but that was the place they could find land. And so that's why they're built out there. And there's certainly better understanding about climate change and the impacts of carbon footprints and stuff now. But, you know, with a growing school district in the 90s, that was really one of the few limited options that they had at the time. And the second part,
I think you did. I think you got it all.
cool.
Well done. Okay. Another audience question. Is there a consensus on the school board about how best to secure facilities and keep students safe?
I guess I would be reluctant to speak for the whole board because it's not something that has like come up for an official vote. I certainly know it is an absolute concern of ours, and the opportunity in constructing a new building to make security, you know, an unfortunate but realistic part of our goals, I think would be paramount. I can't imagine my fellow board members would not want to see the building built to contemporary standards for safety. Something we just also addressed was the addition of a fourth school resource officer in responding to some of the kinds of the increase of calls and things, in particular for the north side, finding ways of doing that. For me personally, yes, absolutely. I mean, like, I am a father of 3 young kids who are going to be in the public schools for a long time, and as we have seen, just having that conversation with my wife recently, like, is that a text message I would want to be getting from my students, as you know, as we've seen. And so what that looks like in reshaping public education is dramatic. It's unfortunate, but I think it has to be a realistic consideration of any upgrades or updates or new builds. For me personally, like I said, I wouldn't want to speak for the rest of the board members.
Great, thank you. Sure.
And we have a robust monitoring process in our school district, and so the school board has established policies that reflect the community's values, and embedded in there is safety. And so the school board ensures that we're providing data on belonging, which is directly related to safety. If students feel like they belong, they're not going to do awful things. It's related to the number of disciplinary referrals that we have, you know, tracking what behavioral incidents there are over time. Responding to, does a student feel like they have somebody that they trust at school to go to, which directly relates to safety. And so the school board is monitoring on an annual basis as a priority, reflected from the community, about a whole host of factors that relate to safety in our schools. And so I definitely see it as a priority and a continual ongoing focus ensconced in policy and our monitoring process.
Thank you. Another question from the chamber. How can schools become financially sustainable? What does that model look like?
Yeah, I think from my perspective as a superintendent for the last 10 years, as it relates to sustainable funding for schools, you know, the model put in place in 1993 certainly had some flaws. You know, it equalized funding across the state, tried to mitigate tax impacts for local taxpayers. And part of that process was, in law, inflationary increases up to a certain point every year for schools to accommodate the increased costs of operating schools. You know, if your heat bill goes up, it's nice if you got a pay raise at home to be able to cover that. It's no different for schools. We need to continue to pay our teachers competitively and adjust to health insurance things, do ongoing maintenance. And so that formula put in 93, while it could be improved around the edges, was sufficient for schools to be able to operate. Unfortunately, in 2008, with the recession looming at that time, they decoupled schools from inflation. And so it was a biennial vote of the state legislature on what schools got for increases. And so it was no longer predictable what we were going to have from year to year. And that has been everywhere from minus $600 in a year for the school district, where we lost millions of dollars, to zero for 6 out of 8 years, to $325 this last year, which has been, you know, a relief. So consistent, adequate funding based on that formula in 1993 would go a long way to sustainable funding for our school districts. And then the one caveat to that I would provide is there are new obligations almost every year for public education. If you think about 1993, what was the technology that we had in schools? How many, individual learning devices did we have? iPads, laptops. How many teachers had a computer in their room in 1993? I can tell you it was very few. And so the expectations of schools grow in terms of technology. They grow in terms of the content that is taught. The number of mandates that have been added onto public schools in that period of time is quite substantial, from health education to technical education to youth apprenticeships, all these additional expectations that we're happy to fulfill. However, nearly every single one of those has been an unfunded mandate. It's an expectation that's been added onto schools without the requisite funding to ensure that it's done well and doesn't cut something else. And I think in a position like Ms. Schams has, teaching music, oftentimes that has been an area that has been underfunded, and it's a part of a robust, comprehensive public education that every student deserves to be able to understand the world they live in and to enjoy it. When I think about what I want to do in my free time, it's not necessarily math. It's probably related to music, entertainment. I want to watch a TV show. I want to listen to some good music on my way to work. So those are the things that really add to people's lives, and yet we haven't prioritized them in the same way. So consistent, regular funding with ongoing increases.
Just going back and forth, show. I think it's also fair to try to explain a little bit how sustainability, financial sustainability in the sense of public schools is also maybe a little bit different animal than what we would typically think of, because of course we're entirely funded by tax dollars, either locally or from state monies. So we're not a revenue generating organization. So there's never inflows that we can account for ourselves to address those costs. So that does put a burden on us to be good fiscal stewards. And that's why I think it's important that, like I said at the outset, our audits have been excellent. We don't have areas of our budget that are exploding one year, suddenly without explanation or anything. And we are able to look for those efficiencies. And that's a big part. Efficiency is a big part of what this referendum is about achieving. When we lose 100 students, it's not all in one school that we can just have one less teacher or two less teachers there. It's spread around all of our schools, so we still have the same number of classes to have. And that's a source of inefficiency that consolidation allows us to address to become more sustainable. So.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. Does the new referendum address any of the issues that were addressed in the earlier referendum that did not pass?
I think the biggest thing that as a school board we've been doing is a way better job communicating. That we've been on a months-long process of community listening sessions, of finding ways of being out and visible in the public. And if you haven't seen us, I hope you will look at our calendar on remaining information sessions. I think that as a board, we've been doing better at having the conversation about having the conversation in the public, and that has gone a long way towards reassuring people about what this process has been. So.
Steve.
I didn't think I'd comment at this point, but I've learned so much during the 8 months and also tonight's session that one of the things that I think is very creative about this proposal is taking the Hogan administrative staff and putting them in vacant space in Central without building new to accommodate that, which addresses part of the reduction in enrollment and the excess capacity that Central has. Very creative, and I think that should be recognized, that you're not spending a lot of money to do that. You're spending it on students and on the school. And I didn't know that until I sat here and listened to you explain what you were doing.
Yeah, the challenge is that everything we put forward to the community and all the big things that you might have seen in the news over the last 3-4 years have been declining enrollment, deficit budgets, aging buildings. These have all been strategies to address that. The one high school idea was a strategy to address that. Would have consolidated into a new building for our high school, addressing declining enrollment. It would have moved out of our old middle schools, and our middle schools would have become our current high schools. And so we would have offloaded those aging buildings, which would have been a substantial It would have been the best middle schools in Western Wisconsin easily. So that would have improved the environment for our middle schoolers as well. And in that process, we would have, through efficiency, cut $5 million out of our budget, allowing us to balance it for the foreseeable future. That idea was not palatable to our community, which I understand. And so we had to close Lincoln Middle School, as a temporary interim strategy. And once again, took a 100-year building offline, moved our students into 2 locations instead of 3. We became more efficient with the resources that we had and helped mitigate some of our deficit by cutting $1.3 million in expenses. This is the next step of that at the elementary level. How do we become a little bit smaller with our physical footprint to address declining enrollment? This plan will allow us to reduce $2.5 million in expenses, balancing our budget for the foreseeable future, assuming the state legislature does their part, and then eliminating aging buildings that average 70 years old. Emerson Elementary School was built in 1939. It has fireplaces in it, which are awesome to have story time around, but that's not how we construct buildings today. Spence was built right after the war for the baby boom, and it was built fast and cheap. And while it has served its life, it served our students very well, it is at the end of its life cycle, and we need to move on from it. So,
Our final question is from the League of Women Voters, which is, what do you say to voters who are experiencing referendum fatigue?
Absolutely. So you've heard it before that referendums this is not a local issue. Many school districts in the state go to referendum regularly. And I would encourage voters to just remember that this is good for the community. It's hopefully seen as a small price for a great good, that we're investing in our children, we're investing in their future, we're investing in our community. I'm from La Crosse, born and raised, never left. And, if people are born and raised here in a strong community, they might want to stay here and they might want to have their family here and continue the good things that our city has to offer. So I really feel like this is an investment in our community and in our children.
One thing I wanted to add regarding the recommendation of the Facility Advisory Committee about advising that the school district does go to referendum again, those discussions were happening around the time that the high school consolidation referendum failed by a large majority, and then also the operational referendum passing. And I think that we felt collectively as the Facility Advisory Committee and as a resident of La Crosse, knowing that this would have an impact on my property taxes, that given the right plan, this community would support it. So I don't think that the referendum about the high school consolidation failed because of the price tag on it. I think it failed because of the plan. And so that was our recommendation, is understanding that the community wants the best plan. Obviously, there's always the consideration of how it's going to impact you and your own individual family's budget. $100 to one family is completely different to another family's $100, and we want to be cognizant of that, but understanding that the right plan would likely be supported by our community.
And I'd just like to echo that. I touched on it earlier, but the experience on the north side of closing 2 aging buildings and creating a new exciting place that just is vibrant. It's 5 blocks from my house. I go by it regularly, and I know that the north side loves what happened there. They might not have wanted to lose the 2 schools that were closed, but I think they got a jewel out of it. And I think this is an opportunity, and hats off to the board and the superintendent and staff for thinking of this idea. So it's a heck of an opportunity for our community.
Thank you. That ends our formal Q&A, and I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity if you had any other comments that you'd like to share before we close. Okay. Sounds like a thorough forum. I'll turn things back over to Leslie. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. I just hope I speak for everybody tonight. I would like to ask for a round of applause for our speakers because thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thanks for being here. And I really also want to thank our audience for raising very thoughtful questions. It's very helpful. Our hosts at the Nature Place have been terrific, as has our technical support from Rob Ramsier at AVS. Thank you, Rob. I'm going to just catch our slides up because we promised you some additional resources. So I wanted to make sure that you're aware of where the recording for this event is going to be posted probably in the next day or so. You will find it online at all of our sponsor addresses that are on there. And also I put on there the School District of La Crosse has a great page on there on the referendum. There's a lot of information available, a lot of detail that we weren't able to get into tonight. I encourage you to visit that to learn more about what's being asked, what's at stake, how people are going to benefit from this, and it's just greatly informative. So that is that. And now, here are a few reminders for you for the November election coming up, some key dates in the month of October. And the other thing we want to make sure that you're aware of is where you can get all the information you need before you vote. myvotewisconsin.gov. If you want to double check if you're registered, if you've changed your name, if you want to know what else is on your ballot and what your ballot is going to look like, where is your polling place. And right now, since we also have drop boxes available to us in this election, there's information on there. So with that, I'd like to say on behalf of the La Crosse Area League of Women Voters and the La Crosse Area Chamber of Commerce, there you go, and AAUW La Crosse, don't forget to vote, and thank you and good night.